Today, I'd like to talk about mood. Not your mood or my mood at this moment. I'm thinking more about mood in photographic terms, how it affects the way a viewer interprets an image. Strong images are a combination of good composition, good light, and often a sense of the moment. Genuinely great images also evoke an emotional response in the viewer, transporting them back to a place or time and allowing them to share that experience with the photographer. To truly succeed, our images need to resonate in this way with the viewer. Mood can be the trigger to evoke that response, setting up the viewer, helping them to frame the story in your images in the way you intend. Now, the dictionary defines mood as inducing or suggestive of a particular feeling or state of mind. Think of mood as reflecting an atmosphere or pervading tone in an image. Thinking in terms of mood and how we can refine and shape this can help anyone create stronger, more engaging images. Mood in photographic images is influenced by many things: the subject, the situation, the color palette chosen by the photographer, and light. Light is one of the most powerful determinants of mood in an image. The quality, direction, and color of light each shape and mold the overall mood reflected in your images. Warm colors are active and full of emotion. They have enormous visual weight and therefore draw the viewer's eye. This is particularly so when a splash of warmth sits on a background of cooler colors. Warm colors presented in this way suggest shelter or refuge. Warm colors can also suggest health and vitality, or even anticipation, as in the beginning of a new day or the end of another. Cool colors, on the other hand, suggest calm and tranquility. After all, many of the colors in nature are cool greens or blues. Cooler colors can also create a mood where fear or danger may be present. The subject itself, under appropriate light, can establish a mood when it triggers a memory, perhaps a summer afternoon spent on a shady patio in the company of friends, a childhood memory of carefree days from an endless summer. Framing a subject, or shooting with shallow depth of field, more so when shooting through a softly blurred foreground, can create a feeling of intimacy or mystery. Dramatic light over stormy skies, whether in color or monochrome, will always evoke an emotional response in the viewer. However, the mood in each of these, and the viewer's emotional response to each, will be quite different. Warm sunlight filtered through mist and trees creates a sense of nostalgia and perhaps a longing for better times of the past. The mood of each image sets up the response by the viewer. In each example, the color and direction of light are powerful influencers of mood. Join me now in Lightroom and let's have a look at the backstory and the process of creating this image. So here is the base unedited image in Lightroom. The image itself was just a question of right place, right time, although it almost never happened. I had overslept that morning, and by the time I was up and on my way, the sun was well above the horizon. If I had left when I intended, I would have missed the sun streaming through the morning fog, and more importantly, this gentleman walking up the hill to town. In Italy, I always have an overwhelming sense of the history, the timelessness of the land and its traditions. For this image, I wanted to romanticize this sense of timelessness and thought that a warm, soft, perhaps grainy look would capture a mood appropriate to this. So the first step in Lightroom was to push the white balance well beyond cloudy. In fact, all the way up to about 13,000 Kelvin. A few other minor adjustments to redistribute the tonal scale for shadows, highlights, and a bit of clarity was about all I really could achieve or wanted to achieve in Lightroom. And the rest of the adjustments here are made quite simply over in Photoshop. So here's the image brought from Lightroom directly into Photoshop. And to emphasize that kind of antique look, I decided to add a texture overlay onto this. Now, a texture overlay is merely a secondary image that's laid over top of the original image that you're working on. This happens to be one that I picked up from a free offer that Adobe had some years back. So this particular one seemed to fit the mood, and when we lay it over top with the normal blending mode, of course, it basically just obliterates the image below it. You can only see the image that's on top. But if we change the blending mode here to overlay, quite aptly named, then the colors and tones of this are blended with the image below in a way that produces a result like you see here. Now, I thought this was a relatively overpowering effect. It was far more than I was really hoping to achieve. it darkens the image considerably, and it also saturates a lot of the colors, the warmer ones particularly, which I didn't really think really was what I was after. So I started by simply dropping the opacity to something that looked kind of reasonable, something in the 50 to 55% their range thereabouts seemed to be about right. I still thought, however, that the warmer colors were a bit too saturated for my taste, so I'm going to add an additional adjustment layer on this to adjust the saturation, and that would be a hue saturation layer, which is this one up here in the adjustment toolbar. So I'll turn that on. And this particular one is clipped, so that it only affects the texture overlay screen, which is the layer immediately below that. And we clip it to a particular layer simply by selecting the clip to button here on the lower toolbar within the adjustment layer panel. So this effect of desaturation only affects the colors that are present in the texture overlay screen, not that in the main image below. So you see I've dropped the saturation down quite a bit. Again, this is simply done by eye to somewhere where it kind of looks reasonable to you. And that's all we did with that. Lastly, I kind of wanted to emphasize or increase the visual weight of the curvilinear line here of this roadway to make it a stronger compositional element to draw the viewer's eye up towards the subject, the main visual center of interest, which of course is this fellow walking up the roadway. I only want this adjustment to affect the roadway, so we'll also add a layer mask to this. The best way to increase or at least I thought the best way to increase the weight here would simply be to enhance the contrast in the roadway here, to enhance its visual weight and draw the viewer's eye more clearly into it. So I do have this already set up. It's turned off at the moment. I'm going to disable the layer mask just so we can walk through the process. And when I enable this, all this really is a slight tweak to the curves layer to bring down the lower tones and raise the upper middle tones just a slight amount. These kinds of adjustments we make to enhance visual weight, which I cover quite extensively in my course After the Click. These are the kind of adjustments that should always be subtle. They should almost be a subliminal presence to the viewer and never really call attention to themselves. We'll enable that now by clicking the little eyeball. And of course, without the layer mask, it affects the entire image. But I really only want to enhance the contrast and the presence, if you will, of this roadway. So we add the layer mask here. And it now limits the effect just to the roadway. So I can turn that on and off. So you can see that the adjustment layer is only affecting the roadway. Now the layer mask was simply painted on manually. Held down the Alt key while I clicked the layer mask icon to create a black mask, and then used a brush with a white color on it to simply paint in the areas where I wanted that adjustment to show through. And that's really all there is to it. So we'll go back now into Lightroom with the final version re-imported back from Photoshop. The only other adjustment you might want to consider with an image like this when you are looking for that kind of warm, romantic, or antique look is to perhaps add an additional adjustment here to simulate some film grain, to simulate film stock perhaps from years back. And that's easily done in Lightroom. I actually prefer the way this is affected here in Lightroom compared to a similar type of adjustment in Photoshop. And that's simply to use the grain option under the effects panel in the develop module. Run up the amount. You can play with the size of the grain, whatever you think meets the particular aesthetic goals that you have for an image. And really it's just basically something that you adjust here by eye. It's kind of a season to taste sort of thing. Thinking about an appropriate mood to set in your images can help to strengthen the visual message that you're trying to convey. Think about the psychological impact of warm light versus cool, of the direction and quality of light. Is a feeling of intimacy important? Will framing the subject or shooting through a foreground object help to strengthen this? Now, if you'd like to learn more about how to incorporate these ideas into your own work, and to learn more about the impact of visual weight along with ways to refine and strengthen these ideas in post, I hope you'll check out my course over on bpsop.com, After the Click. I'll leave a link below, and if you like this and found it interesting, please give it a like, and thanks for watching.